Well, welcome everybody to episode 5 of my podcast, Leaders in Safety. This week, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Rebekah Ganim. Rebekah is the Group Head of Safety at Sunrice. Rebekah, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to know you, and it's nice to know we've got some things in connection. I'm on school holidays at the moment, so I'm down in Geelong, and you're also in Geelong as well, so we're quite close.
Yes. That's correct. We could have had a coffee together.
I know. Next time. But no, thank you so much, Rebekah, for joining me. I'll just crack on with question 1, which is, you began your career in the Air Force, and then you moved on to the private sector with Qantas. Tell us, how did you get involved into the health and safety profession?
You know, that's a question I get asked a lot. I enrolled into the Royal Australian Air Force when I was a teenager, and I always knew I wanted to do something that made a difference. And through the Air Force, I was really fortunate enough to get an apprenticeship with Qantas as an aircraft maintenance engineer. And, you know, something that I find is that safety in the airline industry is no different to what we strive to achieve as a health and safety professional. So, you know, it involves things like managing aviation, safety, operations, but in a systemic sort of systematic, organised way. To what we want to achieve is to minimise risk. So Qantas has a common opportunity in health and safety department, and I've never looked back since.
It's interesting. One thing I've actually noticed after been focusing on the health and safety profession over the last 8 to 9 months, there seems to be a lot of people from the Defence Force that have moved into health and safety. It's quite a common thing to make that transition. Yeah. Have you seen the same thing yourself?
Yeah, I have. I even throughout my recruitment times, throughout different countries that I've been in, I've had a lot of military people apply. And really, again, it's that systemic risk management process drive and the way we think. So I have seen that's very common.
And was, you know, back then was Qantas quite leading edge when it comes to health and safety? I mean, obviously you're working for a very, very, you know, I guess, safety conscious industry sector. Well, I assume that it was probably a good sort of starting ground for you when it comes to the private sector, health and safety, and being Qantas in the aviation sector.
Yeah, no, definitely. And also too, Qantas introduced me to the DuPont methods and systems, a way of thinking. So, you know, for back then, I would say Qantas was very advanced for health and safety, you know, and that's about, 15, 20 years ago. So, yeah. Yeah,
no, it's just one of the theme that I've got for the podcast for the months of June and July is either somebody who's worked and lived overseas or has had a global remit. What I liked about yourself is you've actually had another trump card to your CV, and you've lived and worked in 3 countries. And if I'm remembering this correctly, in order, Thailand, China, and the US. What was that experience like for you?
Phenomenal. You know, my time overseas was an absolutely amazing experience, and you know, working abroad, you know, it's definitely a great way to develop your communication influencing skills. And I also think, you know, it's great to truly immerse yourself in the culture of a country and meet other people. But you know, it also gives you an insight into your industry from another cultural perspective. So I find that, you know, it really it's really quite valuable.
I've always interested to hear about the differences in regions around the world in terms of, you know, where regions are at from a health and safety perspective, whether it's culturally, whether it's systems and processes, or just knowledge. Did you find a big difference in all 3 regions, or because Thailand and China are in the Asia region and the US is very separate, there was more 2 distinct differences? How was that from a regional perspective?
Yeah, really good question. You know, for me, when it came to health and safety, each region was still working towards the same strategic pillars. So I was obviously with the same company, but I would say they were at different levels of maturity in their safety journey. And what surprises a lot of people is the Asia Pacific region was one of the best performing regions. And I truly believe that was probably contributed to their culture and their respect for the workplace. So a very hierarchical type structure. But yeah, it was very interesting.
And in the US, was that where you held a global role?
That's correct. Yeah. So I went from Asia Pacific, being the director of Asia Pacific, where I had about 14 countries, and then moved towards the global position, which with every country in the world and around about 60,000 people.
Wow, that is absolutely massive. And what sort of manufacturing sites were there? How many were there around the world?
At the time, I was with the Goodyear tire and rubber company. There were around about 50 manufacturing sites around the world, but also, had a non-manufacturing operations with thousands of retail stores, airship operations, racetracks, centers for innovation. So there was quite a big company, logistics, transport, you name it.
Wow. Just out of interest, what's your fondest memory in terms of, I don't know, something you might have achieved or been really proud of in your journey with Goodyear while you're overseas?
My fondest memories is really the people. I love people. I love culture. I like getting out there and being a part of those cultural differences and journeys is just been phenomenal. And that's the things that I look back on and memories and photos of, being there with, in India and International Women's Day, or being in China and helping build the Goodyear Hope School for children, and being there and making dumplings with them. Just the things like that, I think, were really phenomenal in my journey.
Yeah, it's a very lucky journey. Not many people get the opportunity to do that. So that is an amazing experience you've had. You've now come back, had your expat journey, and probably adjusting back to life back in Australia. Maybe just for the audience that's listening in, can you give us some insights into the scale and operations of Sunrice, and then after talking about that, maybe what its safety journey has been like over the last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sunrice, has an absolute unique global presence, and it still has great opportunity for growth. So we just released our financial report last week, and we have over 1 billion in revenue. It's around 2,200 employees globally, but that's not including we have a lot of growers and contractors as well. But for Sunrice, for those who aren't familiar with it, they have branded products in around 50 countries, but they do have a significant market in the Pacific, the Middle East, and definitely we have expanding markets across Asia. So there's around about 35 brands in excess of 1,100 products. And they're products that you will see in the supermarket, everyday life, things like table rice, snacks, ready-to-go meals. We do a lot of rice flour, and also in the livestock and companion animal product industry as well. So I would say it's a very vertical integrated business. So we operate across the entire value chain. So from the rice paddies all the way to your plate. So really interesting company. Operationally, we have presence in 11 countries, and a lot of people really aren't aware of that. They think Sunrice just being in Australia. But we also operate in the US, Singapore, the UAE, New Zealand, which is quite recent for us, Solomon Islands, China, Japan, Jordan, Vietnam, and a really large operations in Papua New Guinea. So, those types of operations, they're really around processing, packing, value-added plants, and like I said before, the animal feed division. But we also have a dedicated rice research company and local grain storage network throughout Australia. So quite large. When you
I think it'd be like all the other lists. I'm actually really, really surprised by the breadth and scope. I mean, 1 billion in revenue alone was a big surprise to me. That is massive. And in terms of the breadth of the products, that's really interesting.
Huge. Yeah, it's really interesting, and something that really attracted me to the company. Being Australian owned and having that global footprint where you can really add your cross-cultural experience to the strategy roadmap is something that I was really excited about, and still excited about right now after being just over 12 months in.
Yeah, no, and I mentioned before that safety journey. So what has it been like? I mean, it takes a number of years to really embed yourself and make the difference of the impact, So you've only been there for just over a year. How's that first year been from a safety perspective?
Look, it's been a phenomenal journey, and I know everyone's like journey is such a buzzword, but it's so true. I know I haven't been there previously, but we're really starting to see that the company embark on a transformational safety journey. So what we're really passionate about is moving our people from, that compliance-based culture to one where safety is that true core organizational value. So, part of my leadership and strategy is really that bottom-up approach with top-down support. So, working with all our sites globally and looking at, what's our culture? What's our behaviors? What are our operational constraints? What are the competencies of the people? But more importantly, what are their ideas? And then from a top down, what we've started to redefine is really from health and safety perspective is our vision and mission, what's our strategy roadmap, and then aligning those objectives and priorities to execute. So, it's been like I said, a phenomenal 12 months.
I imagine that, I was talking to, I think 2 episodes ago, I was talking to Brian Long, who's the head of health, safety, wellbeing for Woolworths. And he arrived back in Australia, like literally when COVID sort of hit, and his day one was like, okay, things are really kicking off right now. You've obviously come back at a time where COVID has happened. Has that had much sort of impact? I mean, obviously you'd probably like to travel a lot more to get to see the people a lot more, but how's it been for you, just out of interest?
The COVID and the pandemic has been a significant impact, I think, to all businesses globally, and especially from a health and safety perspective. I am quite used to having, decentralized teams, people all around the world, and I think we're so fortunate to have platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams. But from a safety perspective, I still believe there's only so much we can really lead and change and help influence without that physical presence. So, it's important then for me to have that team globally that can really execute what you're looking for. But I mean, I'm used to having a passport in the back of my pocket, and now I don't think it's had a stamp for about 18 months. So it's really different.
Yeah, yesterday my wife actually said my passport expires in a couple of months or something. For the first time, I was like, I'm not in no rush to really get that sorted. But anyway, funny how life is at the moment. So, and it would be interesting when we, have another time to catch up to talk more in detail about this subject, but maybe more from a top level. Building teams. I love talking about this, and certainly the fact that you've lived and worked in Thailand, in China, in the US. You inherit people, you develop people. You also find your own talent to then bolster your teams. You don't get to your sort of level without having built great teams around you. What have been your strategies for building talent, developing talent, retaining talent?
Look, that's a really great question, but a really important one too, because I truly believe you definitely do not get to my level without a great team. And I often say to my people, I'm only as successful as the team around me. And I truly believe that. So for me, attracting talent can be tough, especially in the COVID pandemic world. But I think it's really important to promote your company's mission and what their values are, and also really consider what you can offer to potential employees. So you're talking about the pandemic. Work-life balance is extremely important to people, if more so today than what it was previously. So, I really need to make sure what can you offer to them to really, align them to that. I also like to involve my team and the senior management in the recruitment process. I think that's really important to demonstrate the culture that you have in the company. And also, once you get someone on board, that whole succession planning and development is really critical. And I think it's critical to, provide your people with opportunities to grow. So also align them to the strategy, empower them to execute. It's really important, but people and teams is an absolute priority to me.
No, absolutely. It's, one of the other things that I was wanting to ask you about was, the influencing side of things. I forget which guest it was, but we were talking about how much time do they spend in their role developing that, what percentage is technical, safety related, and what part is soft skills, nurturing, developing, and specifically the subject of influencing. Do you see the influencing part as a really key part at your level, whether it be the boardroom, the shop floor?
Absolutely. I would say the influencing level is almost, 100% of my role. For me, I'm the head of the function. It's so important for me to influence, as I said before, not only from the bottom up, but the top down. And then my team really go out and execute that strategy. So I would say influencing is the number one sort of key area that we need to be really good at.
Just a little bit off piste, Rebekah, when it comes to influencing, do you find in your role and your experience at the senior level that more of your time has been spent influencing more at the senior ranks, or do you find it's more the middle management or shop floor that you spend more of your time talking and getting people to understand why the safety function exists, the values it can add to the business? Where is more time spent in terms of the level of the organization?
Yeah, look, for me personally, I spend probably the majority of my time at that middle management to senior to the board level. And then my team who are, how I have business partners and managers in each country or business unit, then they go out and then they influence really from that middle level down. So yeah, I would say definitely more that top half. But again, it really involves that bottom up, top down, but we're a team. It's not just me. It's not just one other person. We are a team and a group of people. And if they're not successful, I'm not successful.
No, absolutely. In your career, what has been the biggest positive change in work health and safety that you have seen?
Oh, biggest positive change. I would say the biggest positive change for me is probably where safety was traditionally owned by the health and safety professional, whereas now organisations and management are committed to safety and we're starting to see a lot of active employee involvement. So for me, it's really that transition from that big stick policing methodology that we had probably around 20, 15 years ago to now really having those engaged, empowered and enabled workers that we want to protect themselves and others free from harm. So, that to me is probably the biggest change that I've seen.
No, good. I'll flip it again. Disappointment. What is the thing that gets you frustrated, or you just think, we need to get better at this? How do we get better? What's something that gets you keeps you up at night, maybe?
Yeah. Look, in some ways, that's a really tough question, because I often wouldn't say I'm disappointed, definitely not as a leader or as a function, but if I think about it from traditionally, I would say it's probably, for me, it's really around celebrating the red. And what I mean by that is, as humans, I believe that we always want to see things right. We want those green indicators. We don't want anything to look bad. And however, I truly think that we need to get better at celebrating the red and recognizing that safety, it's not just about the absence of incidents. It's truly about, the presence of safety in our workplace culture. So yeah, for me, celebrating the red.
No, it's great. I asked that question to everybody because everyone's got a different view on things. And I think that's a really, a very good point you just made, Rebekah. There's a number of people on this podcast, and one of the values I try to add is for someone to listen in who might be aspiring to want to be a general manager, a senior level person in health and safety. And I ask, what bit of advice you can provide to them in terms of their journey. It could be anything from academic through to soft skills to whatever. What's something that you've got for people listening in terms of a bit of advice for their journey to go to the next level?
My advice would be, if you get an opportunity to live and work overseas, jump on it. I mean, I personally have spent nearly 10 years working and living in other countries, as you said before, China, Thailand, the US, and that was so critical to my personal development and success as a global leader. So, that would be my biggest bit of advice. Get an opportunity, take it.
Yeah, no, I subscribe to that, having done the overseas journey myself. I think that's a really authentic bit of advice, Rebekah, because I think it just arms people with the opportunity to see things through a different lens, whether it's learn about safety from maybe a different perspective, and also the degree of capability of where operations are, etc. So, it's a good point. I mean, not everyone obviously had that opportunity, but I guess if people try to, one way they can do that is trying to work for an organisation, whether it be an Australian or international organisation that's got operations overseas. It's certainly something which I think companies these days really much do support, moving people overseas still.
Absolutely.
So, no, very, very good. In terms of from a final perspective, Rebekah, what do you sort of see as your next, I guess, projects over the next sort of like 18 months to 2 years? COVID's starting to hopefully become under control a little bit. What do you sort of see on the horizon as being the next sort of things that are going to be on your agenda over the next perhaps 2 to 3 years at Sunrice?
Excellent question. I mean, I believe what you're saying around COVID. I think COVID and the management of the pandemic is still going to be a priority. I truly believe, in the next year or so. But really for us, it's really looking at the whole, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And what are we going to do to achieve that destination? So, as I said earlier, we are quite a diverse business. So really looking at centralizing that health and safety function, building that bottom-up culture with the top-down approach, aligning the board to our critical risks, and really building that management system to the ISO 45001, and also looking at the new mental health type programs that are out there, and really driving that to success. So that's probably our biggest priorities over the next sort of 18 months to 2 years.
It's great to see you bring up the mental health side of things. All the people I've spoken to over the last 5 episodes have touched on that, and it's such an important thing to be leading from the front and embracing to support what people are going through. So it's great to hear that you're leading the charge on that. So, but Rebekah, thank you. I mean, I've really, again, as I said, I found your career interesting, having all the international adventures that you've had, and welcome back. And it sounds like you've got a big, complex organization, and you're going to add a lot of great value. But thank you very much for being my guest of episode 5. So.
No, absolutely. And it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you.
All the best. Fantastic. Thanks, Rebekah.
Cheers.